Hinderk M.Emrich. And let me just say a little bit of a biographical background. Hinderk M.Emrich was born in 1943 and studied at the University of Bern. And he completed his PhD at the University of Munich in 1998 and wrote his habilitation in molecular neurobiology at the Technical University of Berlin in 1972. In the first half of the 70s, pathophysiological studies at the pediatric hospital in the University of Munich in collaboration with the Department of Physiology of Munich. Then in the second half of the 70s, he underwent a postgraduate training in psychiatry, neurology, and clinical psychopharmacology. From 1979 until 87, there was a group and later department leader of clinical psychopharmacology at the Max Planck Institute for Psychiatry. In the early 90s, Emrich was a fellow at the Wissenschaftskolleg zu Berlin. And then from 1992 to 2008, a chair of the Department of Psychiatry at the Medical School of Hannover. And we will hear today a lot of his new and even ongoing research, also connected to Hannover. In March 1995, he had a guest professorship in the Ben Gurion University of Negev, and from 95 to 97, he was a guest professorship at the Kunsthochschule für Neue Medien in Cologne, and numerous other guest professorships that I will just very skip for the time. Hinderk M.Emrich, we are very happy to have him here as a presentation and a keynote speaker for the start of our synesthesia conference. He will speak today about synesthesia, synesthesis, and the enhancement of coherence. And we're very glad to welcome you. Thank you.
Dear Regine, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very glad to be here in this nice conference, and I speak about synthesis and synesthesis, and this syn is, so to say, the coupling also of this conference here, since it brings together the arts, the phenomenon of synesthesis and synesthesia, and also philosophy, I think. So we are here going to erect bridges. And in synthesis and synesthesis, one of the main challenging questions is, which are the origins of contextualities? That means complex events which make our life to be alive at all. And so to say, of situations. What does it mean to be a human being? Which are these fundamental questions here? And this means the phenomena of synesthesis and of synesthesia are not restricted to peculiar or, so to say, unusual perceptions, but have to do with the subject of our whole life. Events of our whole life are on stake here. We therefore should ask, what are the fundamentals of these questions related to synesthesia and, so to say, related to our conference? And why is it a bridge to the arts? Why are artists so much interested in this phenomenon? It's not self-explaining. So, the arts, how to make music. A situational topic. It's a situation. One fundamental topic within our concrete life is more or less represented in the question, what does it mean to be within a situation? For example, Vladimir Horowitz playing an impromptu by Franz Schubert. What is ongoing here with him, with us, if we have such an experience? And this has, from the neurobiological point of view, the implication of coordination of so many different aspects of neurobiology. So to say, the coordination of different mental worlds in which we exist. Inner worlds, outer worlds, cognitional worlds, memorial worlds, emotional worlds, phantasmatic worlds, worlds of sensitivity, of sensory perception, worlds of different types of motor activity, as you will see now with Horowitz, atmospheric worlds, procedures of presentation of situations which can only be organized since the brain contains, so to say, subtype brains, namely cognitional brains, emotional brains, motor functioning brains, perceptual brains, vegetative brains of the autonomous system, abdominal brains, and so on. And these all have to coordinate basic topics of synthesis and synesthesis in the sense of the understanding of Immanuel Kant. So to say, Kant brings us here together with this term of synthesis. In the situation of an art performance, we are going to witness a magic moment, a presentation of Horowitz, and we will observe him in the initial procedures of himself before he starts to play. I want to tell you something about what means situation, to be situated. I'm also here situated in a special way and you are in a different one, but we combine each other. Before he starts playing piano, he introspectively is going to concentrate. He looks into the surrounding. He looks into the public in the concert hall. He takes over emotional contact. He is ordering his class. He orders his chair. He folds and rubs his fingers, looks again into the public, looks on the keyboard, and then, in an unexpected moment, possibly unexpected by himself, he starts. What is the meaning of this? His fingers are extremely stretched and are in a very intimate contact with the keyboard surfaces. He nearly always is more or less in a phase of motor activity with a sensory state of finger contact with the keyboard. And so, what we really can grasp from this experience is that more or less always there is an intermodal activity of censorship, of sensorial experiences and motor activity. So the phenomenon of transmodality is what brings us together in the investigation of synesthesia. You can grasp what I explained to you, what's going on. Now the next subject I want to raise here, how do we perceive? Neurobiology of perception and conceptualization and their interactions. I told you about creating a situation in the arts, and this intermodality, which I showed you. And it becomes clear that perceptual processes are not monolithic, not mono. They are always trans, inter, syn. They cannot be monopolized by one single feature, one neuronal process. They are multi-component interactions of different subsystems which are in their interaction able to construe perceptual realities. Perceptual realities. This brings us together in the arts. And the way how this is fulfilled can be described as the interaction between two basic components, namely on the one hand the constructivity of the brain. This is a prefrontal activity, the ability of imagination, of fantasy, of creativity, and the colors in synesthesia, the so-called Martian colors, are imagined colors. It's not real colors, it's this internal colors. This is the creativity, the imaginative, or in the sense of neurobiology terms, the so-called top-down phenomena. They come from the hypothesis to the reality, neurobiological reality. And the other component is a component of the so-called bottom-up. That means from the basic of sensory inputs into all these machineries which are interactive within our brain. I give you a metaphor of this. Pure sensuality. The brain is able to measure something. In the brainstem it is measured how much CO2 do I have in the blood. It's very important for the activity of the brain. And it can measure the glucose concentration. So this is absolutely bottom up. The basic is sensory inputs in nerve cells. And the opposite is pure constructivity, color within a dream. You are dreaming, the eyes are closed, the retina is not active, but you see a color. This is an invented color. It's a Martian color. It's a color which has to do with the phenomena we are exploring here, namely the internal colors of synesthetes. Now, we live in a world of, so to say, naive realism. Naive realism is the ability of us to believe the reality of the outer world is as it appears to me. The object of a tree is a real object. It is not a phantasmagoria. It is not a construction of my mind. It is real. And we perceive it by using our sensory systems, and then our brain is, so to say, a computer which evaluates it. But Immanuel Kant showed us more than 200 years ago that before we can evaluate anything, we need a concept, an idea, a, so to say, world model. And so we have an interaction between our concepts, the so-called top-down phenomena, and the grasping of sensory inputs. And this is, so to say, a circuit. How is this circuit in our brain organized? Desimone, It's a brilliant investigator in neurobiology in the States, made this cartoon about the direction from the prefrontal cortex. I told you this is a site where you have imaginations, fantasies, creativity, the top-down stream active from prefrontal to occipital, and you have on the other hand, as Desimodo showed, this bottom-up, or so-called passive stream regarding the inputs from sensory systems. And this cartoon shows you how, so to say, avatars in ourselves are discussing about the real reality, what is outside, what might be true. For example, here these 4 avatars are discussing interactive, the different subsystems in the brain are interactive and give votes, so to say. Oh, this must be a tower which is behind the other one. Since there is a shadowing, it is smaller. There are many rules in neurobiology regarding to interpret the pictures represented in our retinas. And this is an interactive process. These interactive processes generate then an internal picture how the external world might be realized. So to say, the question, what is real? And this is now the moment to think about neurobiological processes, to investigate this. Before we investigate the questions as to how synesthesia is realized in our brains, everybody can have synesthetic experiences. For example, if he takes drugs, or as in a special dream. But some of us are able to have, so to say, genuine synesthesia. Before we can investigate it, we have to understand a little bit how the perceptions are realized at all in us. And for this, the so-called illusion research is so important. The research about illusory visual phenomena. So we have a real series of types of illusions which were very fruitful in my research at the Max Planck in Munich and the medical school Hannover regarding psychiatric research and brain research in regard of synesthesia. Visual illusions teach us something about top-down phenomena. For example, this triangle here appears to us very clear to shadow over the other structures, but on the other hand, it's very clear that these lines do not exist. They exist in our mind. Our mind construes these lines. But electrophysiologically, if you have electrodes in the space where these networks have these interactions and discuss about is there a line or not, you can monitor electrophysiological changes. So it is, so to say, real in the brain, though it is imagined. So you have the neurophysiology of imagination, which is very important for synesthesia research. And there also the same situation. You have in synesthesia imaginations which appear to you real, but they are, so to say, constructs or fantasies. So this type of illusion research is very important to understand how the brain is functioning. Here the so-called Necker cubes, they play with you. They have 2 configurations, and Professor Peppel, a neurophysiologist in Munich, construed two of them together, and sometimes both go to the behind part, and then in an unexpected moment, in the same way as I spoke about Horowitz, they get in the opposite direction. So they play with you, and it is very difficult for us to change our mind. Please go now in the opposite direction. What is the reason for this? There are two alternative interpretations of this, and the mind, to some extent, has enough from the one and kicks it over to the opposite, but not by your free will, okay? And this kissing couple never comes to fulfilling the kiss, since you conceptualize with your top-down abilities in your mind, either the male or the female, but perhaps in a psychedelic moment you could bring them together. And this is to remind you on the evolutionary aspect of neurobiology, namely the fact that I told you about the different subtypes of neural systems. They have evolutionary roots, reptile brain and the ancient mammalian brain and the later mammalian brains. They are overlaying each other. And this is a so-called reduced brain in which you have better order and then can explore what neurophysiology can construe about their findings. Now, a great breakthrough then was the positron emission tomography about 25 years ago, with which you can, in the normal human brain, investigate functional activities. And here you can see that indeed what De Simone has shown in his cartoon, it is a great difference. For example, if you are passively looking into words in the left upper part, or if you are, on the other hand, generating the words in the lower right part. So you can really see from experimental data that this cartoon of De Simone is true. Now, reality construction. How do you find out if this vessel is projected from above or from below? It is ambiguous. You can look from the upper part, you can from the lower part. It is your decision, it is your construction. So there must be some hint within our brain to see what is real, what is true. And the naive realism, as I told you, has to do with illusions and their quality to instrue us regarding the qualification of subjective realities. And here I show you now another interesting illusion, namely the so-called hollow mask. You see the astonishing phenomenon that the mask is skipping when you show the other side. There is a tendency of our mind to construe the mask as being convex and not concave. So there must be some what we call censorship. There must be something in our mind to construe the world as to the rule of plausibility. It is more plausible that such a mask is not concave, but it is not concave, but convex. And this is what we call the ratiomorphous apparatus, or the censorship. That means there must be some rules which have to do with the plausibility control. And if this control is not functioning enough, then there is increasing of creativity, as like in artists, but also increase in madness. And here is another wonderful illusion with the so-called Babylonic cuneiforms. It is an illusion regarding shadowing. Perhaps you think about what does it mean, shadowing, in regard of light comes from above, and the cuneiform is depicted into, concavely, is into the wall. Now I only turn around the slide. 45 degrees, 90 degrees, more. And now some of you will have a switch already, some of you not. But now everybody will say, oh, there's a difference now. This cuneiform is now convex. And you can do the same with hemispheres by Ramachandran. You see now it is concave. And now comes the topic of transmodal integration. From the beginning of my lecture, I always insisted in the rule of transmodality. That means the different aspects of our mind, of our construction and understanding and grasping of a situation has to do with this transmodality. But how does transmodality function? This is the main question in synesthesia research. And I have to confess you, when I started with synesthesia research about 19 years ago, I had the luxury that it was not an official topic of my professorship in psychiatry, so it was, so to say, my private fantasy, what to do there. And I enjoyed to do a research in which I did not look so much what others find and others think about it. I want to find my own questions. And after 2 years of research, I found a very important question. Namely the question, if a person with synesthesia tells me about an A with the color red, after 2 years I came up with the idea, oh, it could have to do with the super question of transmodality, how is synthesis occurring? And I asked the question, is it possible for you to separate your inner hyperobject, namely this A, which is red, to separate it, the A, from the red? If it is not possible, then there is, so to say, this Kantian synthesis. And everybody told me, my internal hyperobjects are inseparable. And that means that this so important question, namely how binding is occurring in our mind, has to do with synesthesia research. This was a starting point to which much more emphasis to investigate this topic, since it would be not only a topic regarding the question how is functioning synesthesia, but also the question how is functioning binding at all, which is more basic also for the others. And my impression is that indeed this is a central point of understanding, so to say, the language of mind, the language of brain. The language of mind and language of brain always is a language regarding bringing together several aspects within a situation. And how does the brain do it? By binding. But what does binding mean? And now comes up the new findings of my institute in Hannover, namely that there are many arguments regarding binding might represent a top-down phenomenon. Top-down phenomenon. In a similar fashion as I started with Horowitz, since he wants something. He wants to play Schubert. This is top-down. He has in this imagination in his brain, he has this wonderful, great music of Schubert, and he wants to again and again reproduce it, and it is a top-down. He wants to show us. He wants to tell us the musical idea of Schubert. So this transmodal integration is this general phenomenon, increasing coherence. Phenomenology of synesthesia. I told you a little bit about this question of this internal hyperobject. Is it separable or not? How does it look like? We very often ask the synesthetes to depict it, since we have no idea. We cannot know. They can tell us, but more impressive if they make paintings. They say such a painting is about 20% of the internal reality, not more. 20, 25. Since it is three-dimensional, it has complex surfaces, has complex structures, its movement is bubbling, is going around the mind, and so on. This is, for example, the representation of an organ music in a church. This is a very simple smell, a complex taste, representation of a perception of sweetness, a musical phenomenon, Mozart, taste, experience. And now we started about 19 years ago with EEG measurements. To find out at all at that time, is there objective data about? Is this only a fiction in the mind and they can tell us a lot? No, it's really true. We showed 19 years ago with neurophysiology, with EEG, that the prefrontal cortex is a little bit more active in synesthetic experience in comparison to non-synesthetic. And then we came up with a, invented at that time, fMRI, the magnetic studies with functionalizing. And these were our first data with fMRI in comparison between synesthesia and controls, more activity in the prefrontal cortex. And Janina Neufeld, one of my students in Hannover, generated models about synesthesia and the experimental evaluation in music synesthesia. And such models have to do now, as you can see, with a question regarding top-down and bottom-up. I don't go into details here. The setup with these machines. Here again, the question as to the mechanisms. And the data point to the view that the frontoparietal network, which is a transmodal network which is able to integrate different aspects of sensory perceptions, is more active in direction of top-down. So to say, there is a greater activity in connectivity of top-down streams. It communicates already with primary visual areas, and the feedback from parietal cortex to V2 activates for 8. And the conclusions: synesthesia represents a phenomenon of synthetic transmodal integration of senses, within which we live not simply in a world of pure perceptive realities or simple motor activities. There's always these dialogues within us, but we exist within situations, as I showed you, which mean that very different mental activities are coordinated and integrated. And the neurobiological mechanism within the neuropsychology of synesthesia preferentially are due to top-down phenomena as documented by evaluations fMRI and EEG-related findings. And arts now, we come back to our initial component analysis, art as a synthesis between these philosophical and neurobiological concepts. Arts represent a parallel universe of our concrete life. A fundamental prerequisite for the construction of such a universe is represented by creativity regarding new conceptualizations and experiences. And now finally I come to a famous synesthete, namely to Kandinsky, and I want to quote something of Kandinsky in his famous book, the famous book of 1910, The Mental World Within Art. And he describes another magic moment of his life, namely the grasping of a situation of Moscow and changing light, and the musical aspect of it, the synesthetic musical aspect of the impression of Moscow. I quote, "This impression does not last long. After some minutes, the sunlight becomes more red, more and stronger red. At first cold, and then warmer and warmer. The sun is melting, and the whole Moscow is condensed to one point, which in a similar fashion as an expressive tuba, musical tuba, induces a vibration of the inner world, of the totality of the psyche. No, not this red uniqueness is the nicest hour of the day. This is only the final tone of a symphony." Yeah? It's a symphonic orchestra in viewing Moscow, of a symphony in which any color is exaggerated to the highest type of life in a fashion which lets the whole Moscow sound like a giant orchestra, and induces different colors like yellow, white, and blue houses to have their own chant, their own voice. With 1,000 voices, the snow is singing. It's incredible, isn't it? About this fascinating relation between colors and musical impressions within the emphatic Moscow experience of Kandinsky, synesthesia artist Christine Söffing in Ulm, together with her husband, elaborated a wonderful film which realizes this text by Kandinsky. And now we will see this movie and hear this movie in which both start with some aspects of a canvas, and this canvas, so to say, is now in a musical fashion explained to us. One typical example represented by Kandinsky's synesthetic way of generating canvases. Now the technique again. We spoke about that. You have to do it. Yeah. 1 second. To grasp it from the source. Mm-hmm. Yes. Ist schon richtig. It comes. And now you make it big. Yes, wonderful. It is now 5 years ago that in Munich there was this famous Kandinsky exhibition, and the Eon company financed us a lecture of mine and this film. And I discussed very intensely with Christine Söffing what is going on there, and the idea was that somebody goes in the details of these canvas, and every look on some aspect has another tone. So it is, so to say, the concert about which Kandinsky speaks in his text, that you look on one part and you hear something else if you look into another part. And the future will be that we do this really experimentally, that you have a special type of electrophysiological spectacles with which you can really monitor where you are looking, and then this music is going on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hinderk. If you want to stay with us for the discussion, if you don't mind. Thank you so much for this interesting insight as a keynote speech, as a beginning of our synesthesia conference. And we can probably take with us as a starting point a very interesting, diverse approaches. And as we know that you're not only into psychology, psychiatry, and medicine, but also very much into philosophy, I think we really found out that your approach comes from manifold ways. And I think this might be actually an intriguing start, that we rather come from a universal system thinking about synesthesia as a model. That is what I understood, is that you think of synesthesia like a general phenomenon, if not even to be said phenomenology of perception. Yeah. But maybe I'd like to open up right away into the audience. Are there thoughts? Are there questions that you carry with you after Hinderk's presentation? Yes, please. We have a mobile microphone. Excuse me.
Well, your findings are very interesting, and also your intentions to continue in investigation. But that means that you generalize the findings of one object into the rest of them. In other words, does yellow mean to everybody this frequency of tone that Kandinsky had? Does everybody combine or transfer his impression of this tone into yellow and not, let's say, light neon pink or so?
It's a very good question. In every person, synesthete person or other persons, you have a, so to say, completely different inner language. That means the, so to say, the mathematical code of translation is different. And 13 years ago, when we had the 2000 Expo in Hannover, I planned to make a synesthesia organ using computer, and to have for every person a completely different way of translating this way of doing it. So if you have one individual, you see a completely different, so to say, color music than in another one. And unfortunately at that time all computers were blocked due to this problem of the 2000. That one thought all computers make trouble in the world, so it could not be realized at that time. But the idea really is, as you say, any individual has a, so to say, different translation code.
Yes, please. Here's a question.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Thanks. It's a very interesting lecture that you've given us. It prompted all sorts of questions. So here's just two. All right. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. All right. One thing is you've shown us diagrams like and it's a triangle thing, etc. And you've spoken about illusions, etc. But it's very important to remember that these are actually pictures. They're not, properly speaking, bits of everyday reality. We see things in 3 dimensions. And you talk about integration. You must also bear in mind a very important point, I would say, is that all the senses are interrelated. That bowl that you showed us, and you said which is the bottom, which is the top, etc. We would know that straight away just by touching it, or knowing that it's on a table or whatever it is. So I think with synesthesia, however, I'm not quite sure where the other senses come in. And later on in your very interesting talk, you turned up an extraordinary phrase, internal reality. And I wonder what you really mean by that. You said art, paintings represent about 20% of internal reality. This is something that's a bit alien to my conceptual system or whatever. Mm. And I wonder whether synesthesia has got anything to do with what most of us would actually call reality, unless we are synesthetes, all right? Mm-hmm. In which case, we enjoy, perhaps if we're synesthetes, a very peculiar kind of reality.
Good question. The first topic you raised has to do with the multimodal ability, if you have not a picture but the real world. I worked very much with these hollow masks. And if you work with hollow masks, you can touch the hollow mask and you go into the, and it is very difficult if you go away from it to see it concavely. But if you start to become a hollow mask painter, I was it, then you come accustomed to the different reality, namely you can conceptualize a hollow mask, really, since you are able to color it. And then your experience is shifting. We did the same with these bubbles and with these cuneiforms. If you take a group of students in a house in which always the light comes from below, after about 5 days they learn, light comes from below, and then the cuneiform switch. So this is true what you say. The other point, what has to do with internal reality, what might it be? Big question. This is a question of Immanuel Kant and constructivism and all these philosophies. But I would like to give one hint. This was the reason why I showed this conceptualizing reality, the color within a dream. This is, so to say, an internal reality. Wouldn't it not be?
Mm-hmm. Here's one more question, please.
Hi, I've got a neuroscience question. So there's an ongoing debate regarding the neural basis underlying synesthesia. And one theory suggests that there are structural differences, so it's due to increased number of connections between neighboring brain areas. which leads to co-activation of those areas, leading to synesthetic experience.
Absolutely.
And then the other theory suggests that there's this functional difference, that there's lack of inhibition between multisensory areas and sensory-specific areas.
Absolutely, yes.
So where would you say this idea of cross-modal binding governed by top-down processes fits? Where would you say, which theory would you know?
Which I favor. I told you that I started with the idea that it really has to do with the basic mechanism of binding. And this was, at that time, now about 18 years ago, the great question in neurobiology at all. My colleague Wolf Singer in Frankfurt was my colleague in Munich before, and we discussed very often these questions, and he had the idea that binding has to do with oscillation waves within the brain. So when he heard my aspect regarding synesthesia and binding, he started to investigate these oscillatory processes within synesthesia. But the data up to now are ambiguous. It's not really clear. So if we would have found this, that these oscillatory processes are different in synesthesia than in other programs, then I would have said, okay, wonderful, now we have it. We have that this is really a functional thing regarding the interaction of these different assemblies. Up to now it's not clear, and we progressed regarding our three hypotheses. I couldn't show the details for reason of time, of Janina Nofeld and Dr. Zinke, who made excellent work over more than 3 years about this. And our present hypothesis is that it has to do with increased connectivity in the field of top-down. We have to prove it, and there is now a real worldwide family of investigators, and I think within the next 5 to 10 years we really will know it. But this is my favorite hypothesis at the moment. Okay?